Welcome to the Girl Crush podcast with me, Donna Pesci. I created this podcast to encourage, inspire, and empower women to dream big and live with purpose, passion, and joy. I'm fortunate enough to have interesting, authentic, and sometimes really funny conversations with amazing women who are just crushing it at life. You'll meet entrepreneurs, CEOs, healers, creators, artists, mystics, and moms. We'll talk about everything from the decisions that shape our lives to the moments that make us laugh out loud. We'll chat, we'll examine, we'll even gossip a little. I'm so glad you're here, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Today we have Susan Parsons on the podcast. Susan is a CEO and founder of Parsons Consulting, specializing in executive coaching and team facilitation. Susan's career has included leadership roles in human resource consulting, software operations, M&A, and fitness entrepreneurship with organizations ranging in size from startup to Fortune 50. Susan leverages her diverse experience to help individuals and teams level up their leadership and lean into their full potential personally and professionally. Whether working one-on-one or with a team, Susan is adept at transforming chaos and confusion into clarity and action by asking the questions no one else is asking and guiding clients through difficult conversations and decisions they often avoid. Susan is driven by the vision of helping others achieve profound self-discovery, growth, and connection so that we can all human better together. Thank you so much for being here, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited. I've been so excited to talk to you because I'm so interested in what you do and how you've built this business. So there's a lot that I want to get into, but I always like to kind of start at the beginning. So how did you get started in your career? What was your first career? Or what your first job?
Yeah, the way back machine.
The way back.
The way back. I mean, we could start with push mowing, an acre or two of grass every weekend over the summer, which was my first job at like 9, maybe 10 years old, which I can thank my parents for just instilling great work ethic. I appreciate it so much now, even though the beginnings were rough.
I'm sure you didn't appreciate it then, but yes, it's nice to look back and say thank you now.
Yeah, not at all. But yeah, so early jobs go way back, but let's start professionally, early 20s. That's when I started in human resources consulting, sometimes called employment consulting. Really is what has brought what I'm doing now full circle, because I spent the first 6 years of my career in that space and feel so lucky now looking back on it that so early on, feeling so green, I was seeing the inner workings of such huge companies, looking at the data. And what we really did is look at how do you attract, recruit, and retain great talent. So we were working with companies sometimes who already saw what that need was and were investing to do even better. But we more often worked with companies that were really struggling to bring in great talent and keep them. So I was brought in to really comb through so much data, to analyze that data, and then provide really succinct, high level, connect the dot summaries of what's going on in these organizations. So that's where things kind of started. My love of the inner workings of businesses and what it takes to build great teams within those businesses.
So did you study human resources in school?
I didn't. So here's the crazy part too. So I was an English lit major, minored in business. I remember the call to so I'm one of those people that could have stayed in school forever. At one point, right?
I feel you.
The stacks of books around me, I think I could be in that world for forever. So I distinctly remember a call to my dad when I think it was the second semester, sophomore year. I knew I was going to major in English lit at that point, thinking I was going to go to law school. And I thought, I'm thinking about maybe double majoring in art history. And the line went silent. And my dad's a pretty reserved person. And often his silence said more, says more than his words. And I just had this moment where I was like, he's afraid I'm never gonna make money or have a job.
Right.
Right. So it didn't, and so I don't know how long went by, but I said, or at this point I could minor in business and pair that, in case I end up not going to law school. That's what I did. All that to say, that's not, I didn't study human resources, but when I got out of school, the company I went to work for, J. Walter Thompson, now Wonderman Thompson, I believe, they've been through a couple different transitions. They were looking for people who could specifically take lots of data and with clear and concise language, interpret for C-suite, clients, what is going on. So they had a
That's
lot of
interesting.
people. Yeah. And it was, you'll laugh at this. I at least laugh at this when I look back. When I found out about the job through a friend of a friend, I get connected with the hiring manager. She tells me, no, this is 2001. So well over 20 years ago and way before work from home was a thing.
Mhm.
And she goes, here's what we're going to be doing. Here's the companies we're going to be working with. And she mentioned some big names. And she goes, you get to work from home. We're going to provide you your computer setup. Keep in mind, this is in dial-up modem days.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And she said, and here's what we want you to do. This is how important the role is we need people who have these combined skills of being able to research and glean and connect these dots and then give us these really clean synopses to help us figure out where we're going to go with our different clients. I didn't believe her. I actually declined the job twice because I thought it was some type of scam. It's like, this is too good to be true. I'm supposed, keep in mind, there was no work from home.
There was no work from
concept.
home. Yeah, we didn't know what that was back then at all.
Yeah, I was like, this can't be a thing. I couldn't trust it. I didn't believe it could be
Wow.
true. And then I finally accepted the job. I think after our third call, and I think at one point in the interview process, I said, this isn't a pyramid scam or. So after I, felt like I could trust the situation, I accepted it. But actually, sadly, 9/11 was about 2 weeks after that. And I
Oh,
thought,
wow.
oh my gosh, here I gave this woman this runaround. And now there's no way I'm going to get this role because people were, companies were laying off or freezing. But I still went on to work with JWT for 6 more years after that. It really was
Wow.
laid the foundation for my understanding of, again, the inner workings of companies, ways to look at how to build high performing teams. My first introduction to kind of organizational design and psychology. We're getting to work with really bright people. Yes, it was just an incredible experience. And again, I almost didn't believe it. I almost
That's crazy.
yeah.
That's unbelievable. I understand it though. It seems so crazy now to think that you would have thought anything other than like, wow, that's great. But I get it. I mean, back then people didn't work from home. I mean,
It
so
wasn't
that's
a
amazing.
thing. I didn't even understand the concept really, or
Yeah.
just trust it because it wasn't out there. But you were saying that path, um, you know, we were working with so much data at the time and I was starting to build the realization that, hey, if we really want to move things forward with clients, it's going to come down to how quickly we can manage, synthesize, analyze this data. That if we're doing so many things by hand, it's really going to slow down what we can take to them, how quickly we can change the organization. And so I ended up working hand in hand with the IT group in the company to look for better software, better systems so that we could do more ad hoc reporting, real time reporting. You think about all the tools we have now for just data aggregation, data visualization at your fingertips. We didn't have that. We were creating graphs by hand. And so anyway, that was my foray into a more technical side of what I was doing, which then led to me going to work for kind of going into the part of my career that involved working for technology companies, first at a kind of smaller company that was just coming out of startup phase. And then that company got bought by HP. So I got to work in a kind of small, really agile, flexible environment. I was actually brought in to bring more structure. You can imagine I was popular as that kid. I was one of the key people brought in to really question why we were doing the things we were doing and to help streamline and provide more structure and accountability. And then as we were starting to do that, HP came in and bought us. So we went from a couple hundred people to 300,000 people
Wow.
overnight.
So
Yeah.
that must have really affected everything that you did for the company.
What was so phenomenal about that experience was, when I work with my clients now, I truly do have an understanding of what it's like to work in a lot of different types of organizations and the pressures you can feel in a smaller organization where you have to wear so many hats and do so many things, as well as what it can be like to work in a large organization where maybe you're more resourced, maybe there are more levels, maybe there are slightly fewer hats because you're more specialized. But you can also get, depending on the culture and hierarchy, it can also feel really limiting. You can get locked down. So I have a lot of empathy and I think true understanding from my experience of what my clients live in.
Absolutely. So had you done any of this type of work? Like, had you had internships or any of that? Or did you just kind of learn it on the go as you were doing it?
Um, the experience was definitely more one to one in my first role at J. Walter Thompson. That was a consulting firm. So I think I got my foundation there, thankfully. When I went into um, kind of the tech season of my career, which was about 8 years in total, uh, a lot of that was getting experience building great teams. So taking a lot of what I learned on the consulting side, what I was doing and researching for other companies, and then actually doing it myself, um, in the roles that I was in there. And just realizing the difference between management and leadership and that shift of there are people who could manage other humans well because people were scared of them or they ran a tight ship. We all know those stories. And then those people who were leaders because you wanted to work for them, you wanted to impress them, you wanted to earn their respect, and they had your respect. That's where I was starting to see that shift too of not just taking the mechanics from those first 6 years in human resources consulting, which felt very cerebral to me. It's like I was learning all the mechanics, I was learning all the language and models, but then it was really working for the two different software companies that I started to better understand. Oh, to be a leader, it's not about your title. It's, can you influence, can you motivate, will people follow you no matter what? And that really
That's
was kind of a shift. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. That's such an important distinction. Just I can think over my own career, and I'm sure anybody who is listening could probably do the same, where you can kind of point to times in your life where you felt you had management and times in your life when you actually felt leadership. And
Mhm.
also, I think taking those experiences as you grow in your career, for me, I know I can point to times in my career where I said, I don't want to be this type of manager. And other times where I said to myself, this is the type of leader that I want to be. I am,
Mhm.
and I think it's when I felt, um, I mean, of course, everybody wants to feel appreciated. And I think that that kind of goes without saying, but I think that there's so much more to it because, um, when you're actually leading people, like you said, I think you said it's almost about like a respect and a mutual respect that you have, for that
Mhm.
person,
Mhm.
and a trust that you're going to, do the right thing and do your job and be
Yep.
empowered. I think that that
Yep.
was when I had the best experiences in my career was when I felt really empowered to do my best and to, take on more and more responsibility if I could. And that's when I did it because I felt
Yeah.
empowered and I felt like I wanted to do more. So I think it's a great distinction right off the bat to say
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. And you're describing, that shift that you described of who you wanted to be and then recognizing, hey, I want to be more of this. That self awareness in leadership is so crucial. It's a key piece of what I work with my clients on. Because it's really hard to evolve and build on those skills and work in leadership development, which is what most of my one-on-one work is. If you don't know yourself, it's to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom, I think as Socrates said. So it's like we got to start with us. We got to know and be brutally honest with who we are. Um, and I love that with my clients. And when they can come to me and say, hey, I don't like how I'm showing up at the office right now. Or hey, I want to figure out how to get things done without raising my voice. I think it's everything we work on in that setting. And those are just really tactical, simple examples. But you think about being able to influence and inspire people without raising your voice, that not only works at the office, it works with your family. It helps
Absolutely.
you parent better. It goes across, the personal and the professional.
Well, it's interesting. Self awareness, I think, is such a big just topic across the board when you're talking about communication on any level,
Hmm.
because it's not something that you can. I don't know, maybe it is. I don't know that you can teach self-awareness to somebody, or that's probably something that you deal with a lot, but I know it's hard to communicate with people or to resolve any challenges or issues with people that are not self-aware.
Right. There's probably a range of opinions on this. I'll tell you where I sit with it. I definitely think, like with a lot of things, there are people who are naturally more clued in. And that might be because of their family of origin or, maybe some great mentors along the way. Uh, some of that, if you look at just different experiences that people have had, they show up in the workplace with all kinds of influences to be who they are. So I definitely think there are people who, in terms of who comes to me, show up with all kinds of backgrounds, influences, reasons that they are the way they are. Uh, but for the most part, I do think for people that pursue coaching and leadership development, they at least have some level of awareness that they want to do better, that they want to get better. Um, and I also use some assessments. I use an EQ assessment, for example, that's for emotional intelligence that gives me a way to say, okay, looking at these parameters, here's what I see. And I use that with radical candor to say, um, hey, this one may be hard to see, or the combination of these things may be hard to take in. Uh, but if we want a human better, this is the start, right? Are there people who have huge blind spots? Absolutely. Are there people who don't want to change? Absolutely. you know, but that's part of humanity. There's always going to be those who are working on themselves and trying to get better, and I think there's always going to be those that struggle.
Of course, absolutely. So let's take a step back because I skipped, I think, a little part um,
Yeah,
of where you were. So how did you? Because I know that you took a different road and you kind of went into the fitness, health and fitness industry for a while. So how? Tell me how that happened.
I did. So I had a great ride at HP and lots of exposure. Got to do some work in M&A, which is a ton of travel. Did a lot of work in software operations, learning the business side of things. But reached a point, and I think it kind of coincided with when I had my first son, of where I was starting to hit that, kind of mid 30, like, oh, is this what I want to be doing? I always thought I would, climb the corporate ladder and just want to go as high as I could possibly go. Like no limits, this is,
Yeah,
and I was starting to hit that wall where, and my can empathize with so many of my clients where, companies we were starting to reorg, every 6 months, every 8 months. It was new leadership. It was wiping the slate clean. It was starting all over. And I had that kind of early midlife crisis that was like, I don't have a lot of control. Like, what am I impacting here? Is this aligned with my purpose? Um, and so I started doing some major soul searching, and I had fallen in love with Pure Barre. It was a workout I had done years earlier. And then when I moved up to Chicago, there were none open up here yet. And so I thought, wow, how amazing. I've gotten all this experience running, big budgets, big teams. What if I could manage running my own business, but marry it with health and wellness? To me, that was just everything. It's like two of my favorite things. I love business operations and then health and wellness. So, yeah, that led to my foray of about 9 years into opening Pure Barre Studios in downtown Chicago. And just, moving forward, moving that timeline forward, I really enjoyed it, but was also knew my time was coming. And it's interesting with each transition in my career, I'm getting a little bit better about recognizing sooner when I'm done. Do you know that feeling?
I do know that it takes a little, while, and maybe it comes with age, but yeah, it takes much
Yeah.
longer when you're just starting out to realize and to check in with yourself in those ways. I think that
Hmm.
especially when you're young and you have all this ambition and you're just like, I have to, just like you said, climb that ladder. I have to get better and better. But once in a while you have to take a step back and say, how am I feeling about this? Is this something that
Yeah.
is fulfilling, a purpose that I have? And I think that in itself, realizing that purpose takes a while too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I felt that at HP. I feel like, you know, I was a little, I can look back now and see the signs earlier that I missed, right? And then so I think I saw them a little bit sooner in the health and wellness space when I was working there, and I was ready. I was you know ready to sell the businesses and was had one foot into consulting. Super excited about that path. So this was, late 2019, early 2020. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020 is that, COVID hit. And here I was kind of ready to be out, but I had to stay in, mind, body, soul, all in to not be financially ruined. I mean, I know that sounds kind of dramatic, but for those that are in the restaurant industry, who were in the fitness industry, I mean, it was incredibly scary to, in Chicago and some other states had longer closures, but we were closed in total about 6 months and then operated for about a year to a year and a half at um, capacity rates that weren't even profitable, being held
Wow.
to 4, 5, 7 participants in a studio. It's just, you might as well not have the doors open. We had the doors open for our people, for our clients, for our community, not because it was
Right.
profitable. So, um, I
So
learned
at
so
that
much.
point,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I'm sorry. So
No,
at
no, no,
that
go.
point, um, you knew that you were trying to for kind of an exit strategy out of that, and you knew that you
Hmm.
wanted to do something else when COVID hit.
Hmm.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So I, I I don't want to gloss over that because I feel like that is had to have been such a challenge and such a trying time and a scary time. And I know that a lot of people went through that and can relate to that. Um,
Hmm.
so I guess how did you, make it through that?
Yeah.
And did you, I guess this is the second part of my question. Did you
Yeah.
at any point consider just saying, like, screw it, I'm cutting my losses? As some people I think did.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Oh, there's so much to that. One, thank you for just your empathy and, your own self-awareness of just recognize, like you said, not wanting to gloss over it. It was so hard. sometimes I'm not sure how I got through
Kind
it.
of a blur a little bit sometimes, I'm sure.
It's a little bit of a blur. If we do get into polyvagal informed techniques, which is part of my practice, I can even explain it in that language of kind of the survival shutdown that I think a lot of people went into to get through the toughest parts of COVID. Um, but I think, the bright, so I don't want to, spiritually bypass or overly, lemons into lemonade, but for me, what was an anchor of hope was that I knew the direction I wanted to go in. So I just saw helping the businesses recover is like, okay, my goal is that I get them, back open, operating and profitable enough to sell. Maybe some of that was pride. Maybe some of that was stubbornness of not being willing to just sell it for $1, which in the middle of COVID or even a year after COVID, it was really just scavenger buyers who were going to offer you like, barely, studios were somewhere literally selling for $1, $100, like just because people were so underwater or didn't know where to go from there. So maybe some of that was, pride, stubbornness. I don't know. I think I'm a pretty pragmatic person. And I felt like I had enough strength and wherewithal that if I could stick it out and just get to the point that I could sell, that I could make it, that I knew I would survive that. And where I was going with the bright side of it was that because I had that foot already like moving in the direction of consulting, I had this glimmer of like, I knew what that looked like. And I was starting to go ahead and, take on some projects. So even at a time when I had way too much to do and I was trying to get these studios recovered, it didn't feel the consulting piece of things. It didn't feel like extra work because it was truly where my passion, my talents, my focus was taking me. So there was flow to it. We hit those flow states where, all the right things intersect, passion, talent, skill, purpose, all those things. It, that's when you know it's right. And so I'm thankful for that because I think that gave me life in a really difficult time that if I hadn't had that, I think I may have just shut down completely um, and felt really
Absolutely.
despondent and where do I go from here? Um, I also want to give credit to, incredible women on my team. Um, Missy, Jess, kind of my core crew, Sarah Dallas, just some phenomenal women that, when I really wanted to throw in the towel and maybe sell my studios for $1 a piece, um, they were there for me and made me want to keep going. So I'm really thankful for that.
That's amazing. I think that there's it's really kind of courageous and brave in the face of that kind of a challenge to decide to keep going. Um, and I think, anybody that I talk to, talking about going through that, um, I don't hear a lot of people give themselves credit. And I think I just, I'm just pointing that out because I do think it's really important. And once you're over it, you don't really kind of think about it and see it, but it is.
Hmm.
It's a really, it takes a little bit of courage, a lot of courage to say, I'm going to stick this out. I'm going to make it profitable again. I'm going to do what I
Hmm.
have to do. And
Yeah.
I love that you have a core group of women that were, behind you and cheering you on because I think that that's like so important for all of us.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm glad that you were able to do that. And then, so after that, then you did take the leap and sell your businesses.
Yeah. Sold the studios, have been um 100% in consulting, which, like I said, feels like full circle for me, kind of
Yeah.
back to where I started. But doing it my way, I think that's the most fun part over these last several years is building something that is, focused on approaches that are truly mine. Um, It really is a synthesis of all the things that I feel like have helped me be successful, have helped me power through when I've needed it the most, have helped me rest and take stock when I've needed the most. So notice I don't think it's about pushing through and stressing yourself to the max all the time. I don't think we're built to do that. I'm really big on helping people find um, what the right what the right cadence is for how they stretch themselves and how they rest themselves is really key. We've got to be tuned into that. We've got to be tuned in, or else we're just working in that kind of fight or flight state all the time, pushing, pushing, pushing. I think that's where you see people, hit those quarter life, midlife crisis where they just shut down, where they've just been so stressed and not driven by direction or purpose or vision, just, you know, by all the external pressures. That's no fun.
Absolutely.
That's not
Yeah,
a good way to live. We could do better
absolutely.
than that.
So let's talk about that a little bit because I know you
Yeah.
have specific, I don't want to say specific, but I guess specific philosophies that you kind of, run your business on. And like you said,
Yeah.
they're very specialized and they're not cookie cutter at all. They're very specific to how you want to do things and the things that you've learned in your experiences.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. There's really three things that I base my one-on-one coaching and then team facilitation on. One is polyvagal informed techniques. And for those of you who are listening, they're like, what in the world is that? Don't worry. I'll explain it. I promise.
Okay, good.
Um, Yeah, you're not expected to know or be an expert. And I also use it all the time in my practice without actually saying that's what it is. And I'll explain more in just a moment. So polyvagal informed techniques. Two would be elevated communication skills, which I know sounds really basic, but my God, how we make it into the world without learning how to talk to one another. There's certain things I do that I really wish I could just go in and teach middle schoolers and high schoolers, and that might
Oh,
actually be part of my future, piece of what I do with this business. And then number three, and this is another one I feel like I could take into middle school, high school, is conflict curious skills. Like how do we deal with conflict? So those are kind of the three principles that I base a lot of my work on, and I'll go back for just a moment and say, I do work with executives and leaders one on one, primarily focused on leadership development.
okay.
How do they get where they want to go in their career? I always say right off the bat, hey, this is whole person coaching. So the personal always comes in there too. And then there's a team facilitation piece, which can also be focused on leadership development, but it all often ends up being about communication skills and conflict resolution. So that's how those kind of all fit together. Sometimes I'm working with a leadership team as a whole, doing workshops with them, as well as doing one on one coaching with the individual members. So, lots of ways that I can work, but those are the three principles. And I can dive into those if you want to touch on those.
Yeah, let's talk about them. I kind of want to go through them. The first one,
Yeah.
I want to talk about communication because you and I had a brief conversation, and I feel like we could talk about that forever.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
know. I know.
we definitely have a lot to talk about. But yeah, let's kind of go through them. Take us through those three
Yeah.
principles.
All right. So number one, the polyvagal informed techniques. I know that's a fancy word, but polyvagal, the vagal piece just refers to the vagus nerve. Poly meaning
Okay,
many. So think about I use techniques that are centered on how is our nervous system reacting. And polyvagal theory is specifically the art and science of how we feel safe and connected. So if you think about how important that is, maybe you've heard the buzzword psychological safety in the workplace. That's one way that it's starting to enter, regular vernacular. You were talking about times that you have been able to trust leaders or felt trusted by leaders. We can't trust unless we feel safe.
hmm
So safety underlies so much of what we do in our relationships personally and professionally, and also how successful we're going to be communicating to one another and working through conflict. So I use that as kind of a cornerstone of everything I do. Um, the basics, I'll try to keep it I'll try to keep it really light. You guys, I just came back. I just came back from a conference on polyvagal theory where I got to meet like two of my heroes, Dr. Porges, which is the founder of the theory, and then his right hand person, Deb Dana. So I've been geeking out for the last 3 or 4 days on all things
Wow.
polyvagal.
That's so
That's why
exciting.
that's why I had to remind myself I gotta keep it light. And I will say, have you ever heard you're never supposed to meet your heroes? Because
Yes.
like you might be, they are that excited. Just a little side note here about that. I was so pleasantly surprised to meet two
Oh, I
people who
love
are
that.
so smart, so foundational to polyvagal theory and how it's impacting the world. And they are humble, they are gracious with their time. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but they literally embody everything about helping people feel more safe and connected. So I just, little side note that you actually
Wow.
can meet your heroes and not be disappointed. You can be truly, yeah, it just,
I love
no,
that. I love that because you're right.
yeah,
That's not always the case. So I love to hear that that is actually the
yeah,
case for you.
it was, yeah, I was kind of nervous about meeting them for that reason. And then, yeah. So anyway, getting into, let's do broad strokes here. So polyvagal theory, like I said, based on the vagus nerve, maybe some of you, maybe you've heard it before. Vagus is just one of the nerves that runs through the body, and it's from the Latin wandering. So it's one of our longest and farthest reaching nerves in the entire body. Really interesting that 80% of the information that transfers through our vagus nerve, 80% goes from the body up to the brain, 20% goes from the brain down to the body. So a lot of times when we think about the nervous system, we think about all the control that our brain has. But polyvagal theory is really what combines the thought of like mind body connection, that
Wow.
we need to listen to our body. Our mind and body truly are connected. There's information coming back and forth, and particularly from our organs to the brain, saying, here's how we're doing. Here's how safe we feel. Here's how connected we feel in this conversation right now. Okay, so just that's kind of big umbrella thought there. You've probably heard of fight or flight before.
Mhm.
So polyvagal theory is based on within the nervous system, specifically the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic is just a fancy word for automatic. So it's the way we automatically respond. So not hard, right? Um, when we sense threat or danger, you have probably felt it before, we can have a fight or flight response. It's where, our heart starts beating faster, we start breathing faster. Um, we resources move to the arms and the legs to help facilitate us running away or fighting. So literally fighting or fleeing the
Mhm.
stress. So in this whole polyvagal theory, the idea is that let's picture a traffic light. Going to be reversed. So green on top, yellow, and then red. When we're in green, we feel safe and connected. It's when our faces are showing expression, we're able to smile, we're able to laugh. There's a calmness about where we're at. When we start to sense threat, that's when we move into yellow, which is fight or flight. So whether that's a very real threat, such as, a scary dog running towards us, and we're trying to decide, can we fend it off or do we need to run? Or whether that's getting assigned a really tough project that you're scared you can't get done on time, can also be perceived as a threat, right?
Okay.
And then the third for red, and this is where polyvagal really diverges from previous models. Red is our shutdown response. This is where we get immobilized. And we haven't always had language to talk about that. And why I feel like it's important how I use it in my practice is that we're not in a world where necessarily we're having to fend off dogs or tigers or, threats like that. But we are in a world that has pervasive stress, and our body reads stress as threat. Like we have to recognize that. So that 24-hour news channel that's constantly going, the banner at the bottom of the
Yeah.
TV. I don't know what kind of things you have pop up on your phone, but any kind of like constant news watch, news alerts, the amount of information, especially via video that shows us real time, things that are going on in the world that are incredibly distressing. And then on top of that, a lot of times our work environments and what's expected of us, combine that with expectations at home. Even as I talk about this and start layering on all those things, I can feel my heart rate rise.
I feel the same.
Do you
Yeah,
feel that?
absolutely.
So that's knowing. So as I'm sitting here, I'll use a real life example. As I'm sitting here with you, I feel comfortable and safe. I've got, I feel in that green. I'm in green. But even as I talk about a layered on effect of all the stress in our world, I'm starting to dip into that yellow. And it's not about, we're rarely fully in one state or the other. There is a hierarchy here, and there can be blended states. So even getting ready to start the podcast, I started in green. I'm excited, but I have a little bit of yellow because that's my body revving up for the opportunity, right?
Right.
So yellow isn't necessarily bad. It's just that automatic response that our physiology has in order to activate in the right moments. And what I would like everybody to be aware of is that there's also that red that I think in our society shows up as people who are severely depressed, despondent. They have been stressed for so long chronically that they just start to shut down. And that is our nervous system's response to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
We treat it as if something's wrong with people. But I think a lot of times it's digging deeper and going, what's the environment they've been surrounded by? Are they going through little bits of acute stress, or is this a response of chronic stress over a long period of time that
And
has led to shutdown?
not being able to deal with it the right way. I'm assuming
Yeah,
because we all we all have stress, and I feel like
all have
you
stress.
can't necessarily, a lot of the stress that we have, we can't eliminate from our lives. It's
Mhm.
just always going to be there. So it's
Yeah.
how we respond to it and how we manage it in our own lives, I assume,
Yep.
is what we have to work on.
It is. And I think going back to that self awareness piece, there are things our nervous system does that are automatic. But the more you're aware of what your signs are, so for example, I know when I start to get anxious, I will move about the house and start cleaning and, get a little frantic. And I notice I'm a little more prone to running into things, to spilling things. And I will start notice, whoa, 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 Susan, what's going on right now? This is this is not just because you wanted things to be tidy. This is a fight or flight response. You need to get at least one foot in green. I use green for that's in
Mm-hmm.
polyvagal language, it's ventral. It's accessing ventral. But I will recognize, whoa, get a foot in green, which for me is breathing. Slow down, breathe, take a moment, and then ask yourself, what are you responding to? Because sometimes I do it and I don't even know what kicked it off. And then I realize, oh, it's because I just read that text. And now I'm starting to think about it. And even though I don't need to do it till Monday, I'm already stressing about it. And then my kids need me for this thing. Oh, and people are coming up. You know what I'm saying? So it's that
Yeah.
self awareness to recognize what's happening naturally in your physiology and not judge yourself and beat yourself up for it, but notice and give yourself some pause and then go, how do I touch some green? I'm using the stoplight analogy. How do I get back to some green so that I can access that calming, safe space? What do I need right now?
I understand that and feel it so deeply because I know that I do that to myself sometimes.
Hmm.
You start to and for some reason I do this at night. I have a routine and I'm pretty calm. I'm a pretty calm person, and I don't necessarily feel always like stressed. I feel like I'm pretty good about managing it, but there are times when I go through like my nighttime routine and everything's fine. And then, you shut the light and you kind of close your eyes. And then it's all of a sudden your mind is like, did you do this? And you have to do that. And this is going to happen. And at that moment at night when you're trying to sleep, everything just seems amplified. Like everything just
Yeah.
seems so super important and so like you have to do it right now. There's this urgency to
Yeah.
it. And it's a crazy feeling. And I hate when that happens. But I have realized one thing that helps me personally is my to-do lists. Like, if I have 100 different things going on, and I don't, necessarily mean all professional, like they could be personal, they could be, errands that I have to run, whatever they are. I am a big
Yeah.
to-do list person and I have to write it. I don't type it. It has to be written. It has to be in my little notebooks that I keep.
Yeah.
And I kind of assign importance to those tasks. And I
Mhm.
feel like if I do that at least, a couple times a week where I have, a very long to-do list. I know the important ones. I know, kind of assign importance to them. It helps me to not have those thoughts at night and to not stress out. But when you're in it, wow, it can be
Yeah.
crazy. And then you can wake up the next morning and be like, why was I
Yeah.
why was I so nervous about getting this done? Like, of course I'm going to get this done, but it just has a different level of importance for some reason at night.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know if that
I
makes sense, but
it does to me, and I could be wrong. You know your nervous system better than I do. It sounds like a fight or flight response. It shows up, it sounds like in an anxious, kind of an anxiety state.
mhm.
Um, I find what you said about, all the things that you need to do and the stress of that being amplified at night. I wonder if it would be helpful to even have 1 or 2 moments during the day that you take 3 to 5 minutes to just slow down and breathe or do a simple meditation. Because I find that sometimes what you're describing, when that pops up at night, it's because it's the first time the brain has had quiet. If you think about when we lay in bed, the same thing sometimes happens to people in the shower because there's no other distractions. They're just left with their own brain. Right.
That's interesting. Yeah,
So
that's an interesting
I
way to think
I
about it.
wonder if yeah, I wonder if your mind and body had other opportunities through the day to just be still, and that might allow it to process, that might give you time for things to pop up, and then from that, I'm a big fan of I keep a notepad by my bed for that reason of if things come up, I like to get them out because I think a lot of times what our brain is running through is it doesn't want us to forget. It's trying to do a good job. And I think
Yeah,
when we can befriend our nervous system and befriend our biology, and when things like that are happening, going, okay, I'm listening. What are you trying to tell me? Okay, you don't want me to forget some things. That's great. Thank you. Like, I appreciate everything you're doing to try to keep me on top of things, as opposed to kind of this adversarial relationship of, God, why again? Like, can brain just turn on, right? There's a
yeah.
different relationship with ourselves when we can say, hey, okay, I get it. Thank you. This must be really important to you right now. I know it
I
sounds a
love
little
that
weird.
perspective. No, I love that perspective. It feels calming already to like think about it in those terms as opposed
Yeah.
to fighting yourself and having an adversarial relationship with your own mind. I mean, I love that. I think
Well, in
that's really
polyvagal
interesting.
terms, what you're doing is you're providing safety. So there's something your mind or body, there's something your physiology is scared that you'll either forget or won't do, right? So
Yeah.
if you can talk to yourself, and I don't mean you have to say it out loud, but if you can say, "Hey, I hear you. I get that it's important. I'm going to write it down right now. I appreciate you wanting to make sure that I don't forget. I appreciate, the ways that you can work gratitude and self-compassion into that practice." That would be one way to handle it at night. I would just encourage you to maybe try to make space for, I don't think it has to be long. I said 3 to 5 minutes, even if you can squeeze in two, to sit in your car before you run into an appointment and just take some deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, and just say, hey, what's coming up for you right now? See if there's anything
I
going
think
on.
that's it's amazing. It's such great advice. And I in the past have been such an avid meditator. I love it. It actually had a big when I started doing it had a very big change
Mm,
on my life. And so
good.
much so that I started making my husband do it, and it changed his life, even though he
Oh, wow.
struggled in the beginning and did not get it and was like, I can't sit still. I can't think about, this is not for me. I don't have time. All of the things. But I ended up kind of, badgering him into it. And now he does not start his day without meditating. And I'm so proud of
Wow.
him for that. But I have fallen off of that. And
Yeah, that's okay.
I have to I have to get back to it because I can actually point to times in my life when, like, a job interview for a job that I just really, really wanted. And this was years and years ago, but um, I remember being so just wanting it so bad. And before I got out of the car, and I don't even think I called it meditation at that point in my life because it was so many years ago. But I do remember saying to myself, just don't get out of the car. If you go in there like this, you can't even focus.
Mm,
So take a deep breath, maybe a few, just
mm,
clear your mind. Don't think about anything. Don't think about what you're going to say in the interview. Don't think about anything and just breathe for a minute. And I remember doing that, and it, I mean, I got the job and the interview went great, but I remember walking in feeling so much like myself and not feeling like I was walking in trying to be this person that I was hoping they wanted. It was such a shift for me, and I never forgot that. And so I do, when I'm faced with something that is making me nervous or making me stressed, I do kind of take that minute and say, okay, let's get back to who you are and not who you're trying to show up and be. So I thank you for that because I think
mm.
that's such great advice.
You are you're intuitively already tapping into the wisdom of your nervous system. And whether you call it meditation, whether you call it, you know, mindfulness, whether you use polyvagal informed, language of ventral versus dorsal, there's all different scientific terms with it. It doesn't matter. It's you already intuitively knew what your body and mind needed, right? And
Yeah.
what you were doing is getting back to green, that stoplight analogy. You were probably starting to hit fight or flight. When we go into fight or flight, we get that amygdala hijack, which means we lose contact with our prefrontal cortex, which is where, I don't know, we choose our best language. We, filter our words so that we come across in a presentable way. It helps us process memories better in real time. There's all these things that we do up here with this executive functioning, and we go into fight or flight. We lose. We actually get dumber. So just so
Wow.
smart that what you were doing is recognizing I'm going to go in there and not be myself. And not only that, you wouldn't have been in contact with a lot of the skills and intellect that you needed to get the job. So
I love it.
I
I
mean,
love having a name. I love having the kind of science behind that. I love
yeah,
hearing about that. I think it's
yeah,
just like I can geek out on that as well. But
yeah,
um okay, so let's go into the second term that we were talking about, which is the communication. And I'm sorry, what did you call it?
yeah.
What was your second
I
the title
elevated
that you call it? Elevated
communication skills.
communication.
Yeah. It kind of a little pet peeve side note. I often get invited in to work on soft skills at companies, and I feel it's just such a disservice to what they're really getting at is how do we communicate better? How do we relate to one another better? And I don't know, there's something about I've been looking for a better way. It's not soft skills. It's the most important skills you could possibly have to be human and relate to other humans. So I say elevated communication skills because I'm always looking for ways to establish shared language among teams for clarity and accountability, to build their self awareness of who they are individually and as a team, and to increase their EQ or their emotional intelligence. So for me, some of it's really basic. I use a lot. I don't know if you've heard of Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott,
I haven't.
or nonviolent communication is a fantastic. Um, a fantastic book, but I use a lot of concepts from those. But on the most basic level, how do we engage in conversation with each other in a way that stays curious, that builds bridges instead of moats, that uses language that's expansive and opening instead of closing and restrictive? Um, so that's what when I go in and work with teams, it's really about that. And it's a lot of times I'll observe their meetings to see how they communicate to one another, and break down just honestly what to you and me may seem like real basic stuff of, you know, we don't need to say, you always do this, you never do that. Those very restrictive words that label people and pass judgment. How can we observe without passing judgment? How can we stay curious instead of just immediately, determining that this is the way it is? So being able to go in and with the attitude that I may not be right, to be able to go into a meeting and say, I want to make sure I learned something new today.
Yeah.
Because you know how many people go into settings together and they're there to give information or tell and not to receive or learn or be open? I mean, that's not a fun environment.
Absolutely not. And and not only, as you're saying this, I feel like it's not only in corporate environments. Like you said in the beginning, it's about personal conversations that you have too. Like there's a different feeling, I guess, in corporate in a meeting or in a one-on-one conversation, but there's a different feeling when you're speaking with somebody who is waiting to talk and isn't listening. The difference between listening to you and waiting to talk is, to me, I think I've gotten like more sensitive to it over the years. And so when I'm in a conversation with somebody who is not listening and is just waiting to talk, I very much lose interest in that conversation because I don't actually need to be there. They don't they you know they're waiting to get their point across. So I don't really have to be there. I'm just the facilitator of their own conversation with themselves. And I know we can talk about this, but it's something that is just so I- once it's like almost once you realize it, it's impossible not to. It's impossible not to see it in conversation.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I think the tolerance changes for wanting to host other people's monologues. Like, oh,
Yes.
thank you for allowing me to.
Exactly. 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 How do you handle that when you see that in a corporate environment? Because obviously that's you're going into companies and kind of helping them to not behave that way. And I would imagine that it's hard for people to hear that they're doing that.
It can be. Yeah. It can be really shocking. Um, my my favorite response, and I actually get this quite a bit when we're going through some hard truths around communication styles, is oftentimes somebody will say, "Oh yeah, my wife has told me that before." Or,
Really?
"Oh yeah, my partner says that all the time." So they're
Oh, wow.
they're hearing it somewhere else. They
Yeah.
just don't want to actually put it into practice. They don't want to truly. Maybe they believe it, but they don't want to shift behavior. So those are always fun. It usually gets a laugh out of the room, right? um, but yeah, when I'm observing groups, and it happens all the time, I think it's called the Babel effect too. The fact that people who talk more in meetings or in uh, corporate environments also tend to be promoted or noticed more, because there's this sense that confidence is the same as competence, which is so not true.
Yeah. Not at all.
Right? So just
Yeah.
because someone's talking more in the meeting does not mean that they are the most competent in the room. So just need people to soak that in. Just remember.
It can
And
actually
when
mean the
I'm
opposite. It can actually mean that they're the least competent.
Mhm. And it can be a sign of a lack of self-awareness, a lack of empathy, a lack of a lot of things. It can be a sign of major insecurity, that they're not comfortable with silence, that they need to overperform in some way. So there's lots of things it can point to. So when I'm working with teams, going back to your question, when I'm seeing that behavior, there's a couple different ways to approach it. Um, Sometimes it's taking a little break in the dialogue and just asking the question, I'm curious, do you guys notice if there's anybody who hasn't spoken yet in the meeting? Just see if they're aware.
Wow, it's interesting.
Sometimes at a table of say 10 people, it's been mainly 4. And
And
then
do you
helping them.
find that
Yeah, go on.
so do
Go
you
ahead.
find that that gives well, let me just ask you, what are you hoping to find in that?
I'm simply looking for awareness. Are they
Okay.
even aware?
Aware.
Because often they don't even know, or they're making assumptions. Well, oh yeah, well John and Sally never say much. Okay, can we get curious as to why? Do they have something to add? So there's a self-awareness piece, and you have to be really careful with that. I mean, I do that with groups that I've built trust with. Again, going back to the polyvagal piece of it, it's like I need my teams to feel safe with me. And so when I'm getting to a point of offering, going in and observing and then kind of offering these little pieces and facilitating, it's in a place of great trust at that point. And often I've worked with the individuals one-on-one. So they want to be better, right? So I don't want for anybody who's listening to this to think, oh, I should just go into my next meeting and be like, hey, has anybody noticed who's not talking yet? We should let them talk. Because the other thing to keep in mind is when you have people who are maybe a little bit more reserved or introverted, it may not be their style, which then brings up the question in the ways that we meet and share ideas, are we doing things that only support those who are more extroverted and talk? Or can we do things that facilitate getting information from all the important people around the table? So, one simple way of doing that is, before going into a meeting, it's always great to have an agenda unless there's a specific reason you don't want to have an agenda. And I'll explain that in just a second. But to have an agenda and elicit information beforehand, hey, before we go into the meeting, I want to get everybody's feedback on X. Because you're going to have certain people who are, maybe they're introverted, more reserved, maybe they're a certain type of thinker. I'm somebody who likes to prepare a little, more in advance, as opposed to respond spontaneously. So knowing your teams and building that trust to see, are you using different ways to elicit information, or are you just always meeting the same way, which then only allows certain people to shine in the same ways, right?
When companies are contacting you to come in and help them, what are the main goals? What are their or what are their issues that they're trying to resolve mostly?
Yeah. Um, Sometimes it's strategy, coming in and helping with that 3, 5, 10-year plan. Um, I like that work, but what I often find underlying, a strategy can be great, but if the team doesn't trust one another, if the team doesn't have great communication skills, if the team doesn't know how to work through conflict, I mean, strategy is great, but you're not going to execute it the way you hope to. So I find that even when I'm brought in for strategy work, I end up still doing a lot of work around communication, building trust in the environment. I really like Patrick Lencioni has a book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a great place to start in terms of just kind of seeing where the team is at with a basic assessment. Just there's a lot of very functional dysfunctional teams out there that they're getting enough done, right? But when you can show them what's possible, that's really fun. So anyway, there's that piece. A big thing I get brought in for is either acute incidents of conflict or an ongoing kind of, hey, we've got this tension, we don't know how to resolve it. And
Okay.
those are really fun. That to me, it's a lot about being an investigator, um, going
And a
in.
therapist in
It is,
in
yeah,
some ways.
it is. And I would say I don't approach any two teams the same because depending, there's definitely similarities because we're all human and you bring humans together and the same types of human things happen when it comes to conflict. But um, really, I go in kind of clean slate every time and, get to know each individual involved and then get to understand how they work as a team because it takes a lot of trust to go in and whether you want to call it mediating or, working through conflict resolution with a group, um, you've got to have a really good sense of the dynamics and a really good sense of where you can push and where you can't. It is one of my favorite things to do because the results are really fulfilling to be able to see people work through really hard things that I will say I don't know that they would do it on their own. I think it's too scary. I think it's often too scary in the workplace to have those really hard
Absolutely.
conversations.
I bet, do you have a lot of resistance when you go in? I mean, initially, I'm sure that you have to work through it, but do you feel that when you're brought in, because I'm sure that it's not a team decision to bring somebody in. So when you show up and, you're here for this conflict
Right.
resolution, I would assume that there is some, some pushback.
It's interesting but probably not surprising to you. Occasionally there's overt pushback, but I would say more often and think about the way people behave professionally and what they're trying to protect and what they do in order to stay safe and accepted, right? Is that there's more this underlying, can I, it's not overt, it's not overt pushback. It's the underlying, can I sabotage this? Can I act like I'm
Um,
playing along, but I'm not really? So being able to detect that is important. But I will say more often than not, it's relief. I mean, people don't know how to deal with the conflict and the tension, and they just want relief, you know?
yeah.
And they can they're kind of maxed out on their skills. I guess that goes into number 3. We've talked about, of the 3 things, the polyvagal informed techniques, the elevated communication skills, but third being the conflict curious skills. Um, and those are really set up for teams that, hey, every relationship, personally and professionally, one on one and as a group, is always going through this harmony, disharmony, and repair cycle.
Okay.
So just because there's disharmony or just because you're struggling to repair doesn't mean something's wrong with you, either as the individual or as the group. Like this is an accepted way that all relationships continue, whether it's with your partner at home, with your kids. We all know what harmony feels like. That feels great. There's
Mhm.
nothing on the list that you're frustrated about. You don't have that like the ticker in the back that's like they didn't do this.
Right.
It feels pretty like we're good. We're good. We all know what disharmony feels like. And that can be in a couple different phases and acuteness. But repair is really hard and nobody teaches us how to do it. I mean, shouldn't we have a lesson on that in high school? Hey, all your relationships are going to go through this cycle. When it starts to get messy, this is what it looks like to sit down with somebody and express your feelings, express your needs using opening language, get to a common place. Oh, and guess what? It's okay to agree to disagree.
Oh, that's a big one too. That's all the communication stuff that comes back up then, right? Because I think there's even in friendships and in relationships, I think that there's people that feel like if you don't agree with my thought,
Right.
they become defensive, and I feel like people can have different opinions and respect other people's opinions. And it doesn't have to be a
Hmm.
war. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to have one is right and one is wrong. And
Right.
I would assume that that comes up, especially a lot in corporate environments, because there's so many different kinds of opinions that somebody could have about, conflict resolution or any of that. So yeah, I find that really, really interesting. So then so you kind of take them through those three areas and just to kind of recognize it in the way
Hmm.
that they work.
Yeah, some of it is just demystifying that something's wrong with the team, or that's something's, yeah, with the team, with the organization, with the environment, because there's conflict. It's like, hey, let's normalize the fact that we're human and conflict is normal.
Absolutely. I would imagine that your services would be so beneficial to companies that are just starting, even if they're very small, because
Hmm.
learning that the right way to communicate with people is got to be, I mean, it's so important when you're starting a company. And I mean, I just see this even in my own life. My husband just started a skincare line, and I'm helping him unofficially, but officially with, managing the marketing piece of that. And it's, there's things that come up when you don't have clearly defined roles. And this is just me and my husband, but I would assume that with any business, there's either clearly defined roles and there's people that don't stay in their lane. And there's, I want you to handle this, but
Hmm.
I also want to control it. And, all of that. And I would imagine that having somebody like you to come in and help establish that from the beginning would probably alleviate a lot of things down the road.
Yeah, it would definitely be helpful. I would say most companies are not willing to invest in this piece of the business that early on, is what I see.
Yeah.
So, would I love to see people invest sooner? Of course. I think that's absolutely where it's needed to sell, because really it's about setting up good habits from the beginning, good framework, good structure. The other thing, something you said that really, oh, that's really interesting. Um, it's amazing the companies I walk into that have been around for 60 years, 80 years, 100 years, from $10 million companies revenue wise to 300 million, that you think have, from the outside you would think they have it all together. But even sitting in those rooms, the number of times that things are not, what is the wording you use, like, well defined and clear accountability, and those kinds of things, that it happens in every size organization.
Yeah.
Even if they're making great money, even it's just so interesting to me. And I think that's where my experience, spanning all different types of companies, um I feel like I've seen a lot. Nothing really surprises me. And you realize people are people and they struggle with a lot of the same things. So the language is often the same. And I've learned that I don't have different expectations necessarily, whether it's working with a younger company that's still trying to get their hands around how to define certain things. I can walk into a company, um, again, like $100 million company that you think has it all together, and they're still grappling with the same thing. They're like, Anna won't stay in her lane. So and so, doesn't know how to define accountability and marketing. Like, we've gone 2 years and we still don't have a strategy. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me anymore.
I mean, do you ever just like get to know the ins and outs of a company and be like, how do you get anything done with the way that the communication is? I mean, because it's such an important thing. And I know I've seen it in my own life. And, not that I'm an expert or anything, but, just things that I have seen with poor communication and when people can't communicate with each other, it's just like nothing gets done. So I feel like you must see it all. You must really see it all.
Do. And it's an honor to be trusted to be inside, which is why I'm not, you know, dropping any names or calling anybody out.
Sure, of course.
I think the common thread here is every company struggles. It's just to what degree. And that's not because that's not necessarily an issue with the company. It's that companies are based on people. And so that's like the stuff that I work on, those three things that we went through, whether it's, about the nervous system and how we self-regulate to better control ourselves and then co-regulate with others, whether it's the language we're using to better communicate, whether it's how we lean into tension and conflict, knowing that it's normal and then help resolve it. Humans, like, we all need help with that. Like,
Yeah.
those are all basic, like, human needs if we're going to be sharing space and sharing visions and goals together. So I mean, that's what I get really excited about, is that I know what the possibilities are when people really tap into and start honing all of those skills. I see what it's like to see a team really hum and work well together. It's a beautiful thing. When I can sit in a meeting, 6 months or 12 months into working and see the language change of the way they talk to each other, the way they show different levels of empathy, showing self awareness, being able to call themselves out and say, "Hey, you know what? I realized the wording of that was not very kind. Can I have a second chance?" When I have moments like that of seeing them,
Wow.
use the language and the skills I've given them, and then watching that relationship in real time, and the person receiving that going, "Wow, yeah, yes, you can restate it." It's
Wow. That's gotta be
oh,
so
that's
rewarding. Like, I can't
it.
even imagine. That's gotta be so rewarding.
It is because to be in situations where I've gone from seeing people, at each other's throats, where sometimes I've physically stepped in between and said, "Hey, we need a reset. Like,
Wow.
this isn't productive," right? To, months later, seeing an exchange like I just described, where, there's kindness, there's warmth, there's trust, there's safety, there's vulnerability.
I love that.
It's That's what gets me out of bed.
I love that. I love it so much. This is also interesting to me. So I also want to talk very briefly about, because I know that we've talked a lot about working with teams, but you
Yeah.
also coach people one on one,
Yeah, I do.
correct?
Or yeah, I mean, for most of my clients, it's based on they want help in the area of leadership development. For some, it's going through career transitions or building into that next role that they want. But I would say for all my clients, I'm looking at the whole person. I can't, look at just who you are professionally without us getting into the realm of what's going on personally, because again, dude, it's all connected. So if you're struggling with something at home, with your kids, with a partner, with aging parents, that is absolutely going to reflect on the stresses of what you bring into your professional life. It may make a big difference in what you're able to put energy toward professionally for the next year or 3 years, whatever it is. So yeah, to me, it's the full thing. Also, because of my health and wellness background, which actually extends even beyond just owning the fitness studios. In the past, I do bring in a wellness component. To that as well. I'm a big believer in using meditation, breath work, sound therapy, polyvagal techniques kind of work into that too. So, whole person, personally, professionally, even though I would say a lot of people find me through that avenue of leadership development and executive coaching.
Well, I think that's another really interesting thing that you're saying, because I do think that not everybody realizes how taking care of your health affects everything else. And it
Mhm.
sometimes can be where people don't realize that until they have an illness, or or something wrong. But and if you are taking care of yourself, your physical self, and your mind, like you said, with meditation and just eating well and moving your body, and doing all those things, I think it really helps everything else in your life. And I love
Absolutely.
that you're
Yeah.
bringing that into it as well, because I
Yeah.
think people don't think
I,
about that.
yeah, I don't. think we consider it enough. And I would consider it malpractice to, push somebody to stress, strain, stretch themselves professionally at the expense of who they are as a human being and at the expense of their health and wellness. So it just doesn't make sense. And so that equation has to work. It has to be that we start with, a lot of times we have discussions around sleep, sleep hygiene and good habits. Um, I'm not a big proponent of pushing a workout, but movement. Like, let's not even label it as it has to be a workout or a specific class. I just want you to move your body, right? What's your water intake look like? What's nutrition look like? Um, I usually ask, because a lot of my clients are in Chicago, some basics around supplementation. Like, are you getting enough vitamin D? Because 6 months out of the year, we are not exposed to enough sun. If you're working at a building all day long, you're not getting it. Some basics around, um, omega 3s, vitamin D, magnesium are some good places to start for most people. Um, I have kind of some things I like to suggest. Obviously, I ask that they speak with their physician before starting anything new. But we need to be thinking whole person, whole body. If you want to achieve certain things professionally, you have to take care of your body first.
So I know that you have the background in owning the studios, but was health and wellness something that was always a big part of your life?
Been a huge, yeah. I was a dancer. I did ballet specifically until I was 18. I swam. I almost said swam professionally. I swam competitively. That's the word I was looking for. um, from 10 through and into college, I went to University of Kentucky and swam there. So D1 school, had some great weight coaches. So I'm a big proponent of lifting heavy, especially for women that are listening. Like, hey, when we hit, you know, 30s and up, we need to be building muscle, holding on to as
So
much
important.
muscle as we can get. Yeah. Looking at our protein intake, making sure that's high. So I know I'm getting into a different, but yeah, I've been around that world for so long. It's been a part of who I've been my entire life. And I really credit a lot of my ability to succeed professionally, starting with like taking care of my mind and body. Because if that falls apart, then, you know, I
Right.
don't know, it doesn't matter how much money you earn or, how many letters are after your name or how successful you can say you are if you can't enjoy it. If you can't, enjoy it with the important people in your life and go travel. And, for me, it's about getting out there and walking, moving with my sons. Like, I actually like to lift weights and lift heavy. I love to box. I love yoga. I love bar, obviously. So, yeah, again, going back to it's like the whole person piece. Um, we can't just push on one aspect of our life and say, like, I'm going to give everything to work. Like, that's not sustainable.
It's not. It's not. And that's such a good point.
Does.
So
It does.
um I one more question.
Yeah.
I just want to end by asking what do you love the most about what you do in this consulting business?
Well, there's so many things. So my personal motto is month by month, year by year, I want to be always moving towards more of what I love and less of what I don't. It's just, I know that's broad strokes, but it's my way to keep kind of checking in and based on what I'm doing, what I'm learning, the clients I'm working with, the companies I'm helping, is it moving more in the direction of what I love versus what I don't? Because I think if you're not checking in with that regularly, you can really get off course. So that came to mind because I think what I love about where I am right now and what I'm doing with Parsons Consulting is that I get to learn all day. Like, if you could see the stacks of books around me, I mean, I am constantly like reading books, listening to podcasts, meeting with my clients, seeing what their needs are, and kind of living in this world where I get to continually learn, which is like one of my favorite, I'm a lifelong learner. I get to do that for fun and then take all that information and distill it down into like, what do my clients, my teams need? Because they don't have time to read all the books or listen to all the podcasts. Sometimes I give them recommendations, hey, this is really applicable to where you are right now, or hey, you may really resonate with this. But I feel like I get to be that hub to, like I said, I could have stayed in school my entire life. It's like I feel like I just get to get all this information, doing what I absolutely love to do, and then use it to help people. I think you read my line. I like to help others achieve profound self discovery, growth, and connection. And it's like, if I get to learn and then help people do that, like that is
Amazing.
everything I want to do in the world.
It's amazing.
To me, that's the best life right there.
Well, I have learned so much from you in this short time that we are talking, and I feel connected to you, and I feel like I definitely will need to have many more conversations because
I love
I
that.
really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate you coming on here and talking to me today.
I appreciate you having me. I know how busy you are. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the lovely discussion. This has been so much fun.